I have been amazed over the years that I will hear myself sharing a very personal part of my history. For example, I'm in a third marriage, and that's very painful because being Methodist, the commitment of marriage is sacred, and it is in sickness and in health, and it's not something you ever want to dissolve. And yet, from time to time, something will come up, and I'll hear myself sharing that part of my history. And without fail, at the end of those speeches or presentations, someone will come up to me privately with tears and say, I needed to hear that because I or a child or some loved one is going through not the first but second divorce and we're not handling it well or whatever. And I just realized that especially having the courage to share our shadow is part of the gifts that we have to share. I was so blessed to get to work with Dr. Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist. She and I happen to have the same birth date. And one of the gifts she gave me is she too was in 3 marriages, and I remember when she said, Ann, divorce is not a failure. And it just struck me because in my mind, until that moment, I really saw it as a personal failure, as a social failure, I just couldn't even put words around it. She said, think of it this way. When a tree grows, a branch grows limbs, and they frequently go in different directions. And sometimes wonderful people find their lives going in different directions. And learning to honor the difference is part of having the courage to be who you truly are. And she remained respectful friends, very close to all 3 husbands, but she chose a life that took her on a different path and they on their path. That was a whole new paradigm. So I just share that with you, that often trusting someone enough to share the part of you that you haven't resolved may be the greatest thing to give. I think we often think it's the lessons we've figured out instead of what we haven't figured out. This is another famous mentor for me, or very special mentor for me. We want to talk about servant leadership, positive expectations in accomplishing work. One of Eleanor Roosevelt's famous quotes is this: no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. We must do things we think we cannot do. In my second marriage, there was a lot of love, but there was not intimacy. And I struggle with that. I just have so much love I want to give, and I was in great pain. And I remember reading her life story. I don't know how much you know about her. She grew up in a family where all the women were lovely and elegant, and she was not. She was not only physically the ugly duckling, but her voice sounded funny. And she wasn't wired to be a socialite. And finding her place when it clearly was not in the lineage was difficult. And then as her husband went to the presidency, she found herself in a marriage where there wasn't intimacy. They were friends. They were partners. She was very bright. And she had a lot of input around what was happening. And they shared their commitment to service, to making things better. But in that relationship, for her, there was not the intimacy. And instead of crying in the petunias, she found people who welcomed her love. And she discovered the world is, that resource is infinite. She took herself and then others and her husband to parts of the country where there were people in great need. And programs began to be created for homeless, for farmers who were struggling with the depression, for miners who were left with no resources nor livelihoods, for the problem of the women and the children. She became a leader of a great new kind of social change, And it was her way of transforming her need into service. And so that meant a great deal to me that again, I was so inspired that now if you think of Eleanor Roosevelt, you can hear her voice. And it was that unique voice that distinguished her instead of trying to hide it because it didn't come out glorious. She let her life speak. And so that was a way of, or the message to me was, no part of me is without honor and something glorious to give and share with others.